about predictive analytics, you can think of this as the free consulting segment of our webinar, Open Access to the Modeling Agency's Advanced Analytic Gurus, Senior Consultants Keith McCormick and Scott Terry. Each question you submit will receive multiple perspectives. We do have, well, one question coming in so far, so we might pull in some seed questions as well, pull up another poll, and we do appreciate those of you sticking around. But again, go ahead and raise any questions, and this is probably the highest value component of the webinar that we can offer. So just enter your questions into the webinar panel, and I'll be pleased to read them aloud for Scott, Keith, or myself to respond. Gina asks the first question, kind of a popular one. Will the slides or playback be available after the presentation? We do record the Q&A segment, ironically, but the main session we don't record on purpose to encourage you to come back and attend with us again. We'll have obviously different poll results. We'll want you to contribute in the Q&A segment, but the live session is offered every month. So you can go back to the webinar page at our website and sign up for the next event and come back and join us. With that, let's go ahead. I would be grateful for, we're considering a rename of the enterprise courses. And we have some options that we're looking at. While you're considering some questions, let me toss this up on the screen and let us know of these titles which is most attractive for the series courses. The one called Predictive Analytics for the Enterprise. We're having some people that are kind of misinterpreting enterprise. They're thinking that if they're in a certain department, they're not at the enterprise level. Well, we do mean just in a larger organization. So if you'd let us know which of these would be most attractive if you saw it as the title of a course series or even as a single course, I'd be grateful for your opinion on that as we look for other questions. Let me go ahead with one of the best questions we had from the previous event, and that would be, how do you change the organization's culture to include predictive modeling? How do you change the organization's culture to include predictive modeling? And I guess in some ways you can influence it, and I think in some cases, I recall one assessment that we had done, we found that, in some cases you just can't yet, and isn't it good to identify that in advance of hiring analysts and acquiring software? And I say yet because there'll be some motivator that comes down the line, whether it's leadership hearing about the substantial gains that others in the industry are making, or the threat of a direct competitor who's effectively leveraging advanced analytics. In all cases, it's a matter of time, but there are certain aspects that indicate that the culture is not ready or it's not welcoming of advanced analytics as of yet. That's my opinion. Let me open this up. Let's start with Scott. What's your experience in influencing an organization's culture to be supportive of analytic modeling?
Well, that's a very good question. I think nothing speaks to the establishment of an analytics culture like success. So what I would do is I would look for a pilot project, hopefully one that's not going to require months and months of investment of time and resources. As a matter of fact, when it comes to resources, I would look, if I'm interested in taking the lead on that, maybe even consider doing that on my own time so there's no risk. I would look to use tools that are already available within the organization rather than making a budget request to go out and buy some expensive software. And I would also look to get some sponsors in it. If you can engage a sponsor, go to perhaps the finance, operations, or marketing departments and say, ask them for a little bit of time to get an interview, define an objective that you can reasonably execute within a smaller time period, and get a win up on the board. Then if you get one win, that usually gets some people's attention.
Oh, that's great advice, great perspectives. Can tell it's not your first weekend. You've encountered a lot of organizations with a lot of different dynamics. Keith, what do you say about influencing an organization's culture or helping it more rapidly be accepting of analytics and being data-driven?
Well, I guess I would echo some of the things that we were, talking about earlier. I think the trick sometimes is to to figure that if we can just get an insight, that we can bring into a meeting, that's going to be the key thing. I think you want to be a little bit careful about that. You want to be looking for something that's ongoing. I agree with Scott 100%. You want to be looking to leverage existing software and existing talent. But if you can look for a decision that has to be repeatedly made, and you can use a predictive model to help you make that decision on an ongoing basis and actually insert it into the day-to-day operation of the business. In other words, to deploy the model, not simply to try to get some answer or some insight, because that will get everybody excited in a meeting, but then you don't get that ongoing impact. That for me is really the key, right? So you want to go for a project that you can complete in a reasonable amount of time, but you want to set the bar with that deployed model being the minimum, not just an insight.
Sure. No, that's great advice from both. Thanks so much. And let me go ahead and mute one line here. I'm getting a little echo. All right. Megan asks, if an organization comes across data integrity issues, like missing data, inaccurately entered information, among some variables important to the model, what advice would you give to leadership on how to best massage the data integrity as important in order to achieve staff buy-in? Let me make sure I read that second part correctly. What advice would you give to leadership on how to best massage data integrity as important in order to achieve staff buy-in? This probably relates more to Scott's segment, but I think it's Keith's turn to go first, and then we'll follow up with Scott on this question. Keith, if you need any part of that question again, just, message, not massage. Message, let me make sure we got the right context here. If an organization comes across data integrity issues among some variables important to the model, what advice would you give to leadership on how to best message data integrity as important in order to achieve staff buy-in? That makes a lot more sense. Thanks, Megan.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple of comments I want to make about that. I think it's in some ways putting our finger on an important difference between BI and predictive. If you're trying to look at kind of what we would call the one version of the truth of what was revenue last month, or how many customers did we serve last month, then if you're missing any data, that number is wrong, and now you're going to have some real issues. And wherever you decide what that value is, some departments look good and some departments look bad and so on. So I mean, the whole notion is you have to make sure that the data is complete. I think that sometimes we overestimate or underestimate, you could say it either way, what complete data means when you're building the predictive model. You want to be thinking about what cases am I going to deploy this model on. So for instance, I've just had some recent international travel. When you're passing through Customs and Border Control, you have the lane for the foreigners, which in this case, was me, and you've got the folks with domestic passports, and you've got the flight crews. When you're building your predictive model, you might be building that only on the foreign travelers. For instance, would you expect the same model would apply to the flight crew? The bottom line is you'd be surprised how often you're building these models on essentially complete data, because you define the data in such a way that it's the complete data that's relevant, or that a particular subset is relevant. So it can get complicated from there, but the point is that we're not really looking at all the data and trying to get this one version of the truth. What we're rather doing is trying to prototype the process on a subset of the data. So our whole notion of what data is missing or not missing is sometimes can be quite different when we're doing predictive.
That's great advice. Thanks, Keith. And when it comes to kind of selling the priority of data integrity and not just running beyond it, I know this will be a little bit pitchy, but training, I would say, particularly across the team, that analytics-driven organization course that I mentioned is about setting the right vision and, strategically. This is selling the importance of doing the right steps up front before just jumping into the analytic modeling. is part of what leadership needs to hear. And like Keith said in a portion of his presentation, if we're going to do it right, we've got to proportion not just the resources, but the time in order to allow for a respectable implementation. So Scott, what would you say to Megan as far as conveying to leadership the importance of spending time on data integrity?
Well, I think that's a great question. It's an ongoing question I believe that every organization faces. If I make some assumptions up front, that we always are going to have erroneous data. We always are going to have missing data. That's a fairly safe assumption with any predictive analytics project. And B, that we know how to deal with erroneous data, and we also know how to deal with missing data. And C, if it's an extreme case that we're dealing with, that we have identified the source of the case of the missing data or the erroneous data, and know that it can be fixed. If we've got all three of those bases covered, then I would let the data speak for itself. I would present a case to leadership based upon, most of models we build are supervised models. They're built upon actual historical data. So let's say we're doing a classic responder model, where we're trying to target the best people to solicit through email or direct mail. I would take a case where I have actually built a model based upon the best available data. I would randomly delete some of the variable values to simulate missing values, or I would perturb some of the continuous data to give it a greater level of error, and then I would show them the difference between a model with good data and a model with erroneous data, and how that impacted historical results. Let the data speak for itself. You can quantify it and put it in dollar-cents terms to them.
Oh, that's great. Always translate it, make sure it matches up with the organizational priorities. Fantastic responses, both of you. Truly appreciate it. And this is great timing, because at 29 minutes after the hour, it is time to draw this event to a close, and I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Scott and Keith for your great presentation segments and the highly informative Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that you'll hopefully find useful, and from there, we'll hope that you'll consider joining us at a public classroom or live online training event soon. Make sure to go to the website and check out the schedule and the details for next month's classroom training in Washington, D.C., followed by our live online classroom in May to experience all the interactions right at your desk. On behalf of myself, Scott, and Keith, thank you again for attending Predictive Analytics Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.